Would you like to play some football?
And welcome to another edition of Gridiron and the Gospel of Faith in College Football podcast. Week 3 of college football is in the books, and it delivered a couple of classics in Georgia, Tennessee, which I guess is not super surprising. It was a classic. At least that's what you hope for. And then Texas A&M at Notre Dame turned into a nightcap thriller and a classic college football game. It also delivered, after week 3 of the football season, a couple of pink slips to UCLA's Dishon Foster, the former head coach now, and then Virginia Tech's Brent. Virginia Tech. Both of these guys are out after only 3 weeks at 0-3. So there's so much to talk about. I'm George Schroeder.
And I'm Brad Edwards. And am I in the right place?
That's what I'm wondering. I'm so glad you're here, Brad. It's so cool to have you. And so let me just explain, longtime listeners of the podcast, and that's, of course, all of you. We appreciate you guys. We know that you've all been listening to every single word of every single episode, and I'm kidding. But you know Brad Edwards was a co-founder of this podcast. He and I got together and did this together, and it's a labor of love for Christ and for college football. And so we've enjoyed it. And then, Brad, you step back, and we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that just because of this season of life. And so Dean and Sarah, friend of the podcast in the first 2 seasons, and a pastor in Tallahassee who's a big-time college football fan, had joined me as co-host. But you're here this week with Dean out traveling, and I'm so grateful that you would jump in and co-host.
Good to talk college football again, and good to be back with you, George, too.
Yeah, well, I mentioned, let's just jump right into it, because I know you've been paying attention to college football. It's like in our DNA, right? Even though we're not, actively journalisming these days, sports journalisming, to make up a term that no one should ever use again, right? But it's in our DNA. But a couple of classics, I mentioned it at the top, but Georgia, Tennessee, and Notre Dame, Texas A&M. Which one you want to take a look at first?
Let's go with Notre Dame A&M.
Yeah, later in the night.
That was the late one, and probably people have heard less talk about that one because of when it ended.
Except for where I am, because I'm in a context that is full of Texas A&M Aggies, right? And so I heard a lot of gig 'em and a lot of whoop. I can't do it, but a lot of whoop, right? Whoop. I guess I can do it. Heard a lot of that this morning, including, in church. Not necessarily instead of amen, but,
Okay, good.
But what a classic game. And A&M won it with 13 seconds left. Marcel Reed, who played a really, really good game at quarterback, and my goodness, looks really good, threw a 4th down pass with 13 seconds left to a little-used tight end, a blocking tight end, who was pretty well covered, but did his best Travis Kelce impression. And Texas A&M won the game 41-40, and the difference was a botched hold on an extra point on Notre Dame's final touchdown. Otherwise, they might still be playing. Amazing game, though. Back and forth. Neither defense could stop the other.
Yeah.
What were your takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, this game was decided by special teams, but it was all offense. And it was totally different than last year's game. Remember the season opener where both teams had some inexperience on offense, had a lot of experience on defense, and it really was, pretty much a defensive stalemate for 3.5 quarters, and then Notre Dame managed to get the running game going at the end and pulled away. This felt totally different, and also, different quarterbacks for both teams than we had a year ago. But yeah, it was one of those that just from, about the end of the first half, it just felt like, okay, whoever has the ball last might be the team that wins this game, because it was just one of those. And yet, like you said, special teams, it was a drop snap on an extra point, followed by the other big special teams play was Texas A&M's kickoff return to take the lead with about 2.5 minutes to go that was called back because of a hold. In my opinion, that's what won the game for A&M. Because the way that game was going, if they had taken that lead, a 1-point lead,
assuming they hit the extra point,
assuming they hit the extra point, a 1-point lead with 2.5 minutes to go, I mean, almost everybody watching that game would tell you what was going to happen was that Notre Dame was going to drive right back down the field, and then they would kick a field goal and win the game.
Assuming not another botched snap.
Assuming,
that wasn't a botched snap, but a botched
clean.
hold. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what that ended up doing for A&M is that it allowed them to milk the clock as they drove the ball down the field, prevent Notre Dame from really being able to, get the ball back with any time left to do anything. And obviously, they stretched it out a lot more than you would want to. I don't think anybody felt like 4th and goal from the 11 was the ideal time to to
Yeah,
finally score that
exactly.
touchdown. I think they would have liked to have done it on maybe 2nd down, but it certainly helped in the drama department. And like you said, it was an unexpected hero catching the touchdown to win it, and just a huge result for A&M given their recent struggles on the road against highly ranked teams. And so, yeah, it was great start to the season for the Aggies, and we'll see what they can do with it. And of course, on the other hand, Notre Dame is a team that had big expectations after being in the national championship game last year, and 2 quick losses to start this season. And look, they were behind the 8 ball to start last year, and they rebounded. It's going to take something really special again if they're gonna get back in the playoff this year.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I mean, I would say that, their chances are almost nil, but it is a 12-team playoff. There are some at-large slots available, and it just depends. But when you start 0-2, it's like hard to imagine. Now, they're still ranked, which tells you how much the voters, and by the way, it's not just the evil, dirty sports writers and broadcasters, the coaches still have them ranked too, which tells you, if you ask the Joe average fan, it says, see, Notre Dame doesn't even have to win a game and they still get ranked. But what it really says here is, right or wrong about their perception, the perception is that's a really good team
Yeah.
that could have won both games, didn't. And so I get it. You're saying they're still one of the top 25 teams. I think they're ranked in the 20s, 22nd, 23rd, something like that. But that's still a really good team. But it kind of brings up the whole, first of all, whether we ought to even have polls. It doesn't really matter, that question. Dean and I hashed that out a little bit. Doesn't even matter because we're going to have them. But secondly, should a poll reflect what we think you are or what we think you've done, right? Which would take us down to the whole same thing with a playoff committee sometimes too. We've talked about that in the past, but were you a little surprised to see Notre Dame still ranked?
At 0-2, yes, but I don't have a problem with it just because, as you know, those ballots are not given to the voters with specific instructions on exactly what you're voting on. It's just your top 25. And if you want to make it, okay, who do I think are the 25 best teams regardless of record, then I think Notre Dame absolutely deserves to be in that 25 based on what they've done. If you believe that Miami and Texas A&M are both top 10 teams, which most of the voters seem to believe that, and Notre Dame played both of them down to the wire, then I think it stands to reason that Notre Dame might not be a top 10 team, but they're still a very good team. And so, yeah, it might seem strange at 0-2. Obviously, starting out high allows you to lose the first 2 and not fall completely out, but I don't have a problem with it. And fortunately, it doesn't really mean a whole lot.
Yeah, no, and that's the other thing. It does not mean a whole lot. So I thought the revelation for me in that game was Marcel Reed. He played better than I thought he probably could play. And, we'll see if this is who he is or if it's a one game blip. But based on that game, he played a lot better than a lot of the big name quarterbacks that populate that league, the ones with bigger, better names. And I'm not even talking about, we'll get to Texas here in a little bit, maybe. But I'm just saying he looked really good. And if that's their guy, if he's something close to that, that's a really tough team right there. They've got a chance to be really tough. I mean, that's a tough environment. They're on the road at night in South Bend. It's one of the cathedrals of college football. And, and they came through. It was a lot of
Well,
fun.
and against a team with its back against the wall that needed to win. And I think that's what made it more impressive, is that was, we talked about the position Notre Dame's now in at 0-2. They knew that going in. And so, total focus. There's no way Notre Dame wasn't as prepared for that game as you possibly could be. And so I think that makes it even more special. A&M didn't sneak up on them.
All right. Earlier in the day, 3:30 kick, 2:30 Central Time, Georgia, Tennessee. Georgia at Tennessee. I think a lot of people were wanting to see what Georgia had, but assumed perhaps that Georgia had a lot more than Tennessee. And I think I learned a lot about both teams. I think they're both pretty good.
Yeah.
I was really impressed with the guy that I've had my doubts about, Gunnar Stockton, the quarterback for Georgia, because this was another back and forth. This is not your father's SEC. This is one of those back and forth. The defenses, you can see there's some talent on the defensive side, but they're having trouble stopping the other team. And they went about it different ways. Tennessee kept scoring on big plays, and Georgia was a little bit more of a grinding type attack. But Gunnar Stockton was a real weapon and made some really nice throws in critical times as Georgia pulled out that victory 44-41 in Knoxville, extending their dominance over Tennessee. I was actually at the last one that Tennessee beat Georgia at. I think it was 2016, and Butch Jones was the coach, now at Arkansas State. So it was a while ago. But we hadn't seen a lot from Georgia. They had kind of mucked around a little bit in their first couple of games. Here's their first real test, and they came through looking pretty darn good, I thought. But then on the other side of that is I'm not sure what I thought about Tennessee, and I think they're pretty good too. What do you think about that? What did you think about the game?
Yeah, I think first of all, Gunnar Stockton, the question that most of us had is how well is he going to do when they're in a position where they need him to throw in order to win? Because that's really something we had not seen out of him yet. And, with them falling behind 21-7 pretty quickly, not that put them in a must-pass situation. It was still early in the game. But, on the road, down by 2 touchdowns, that was a big test. And like you said, he came through with a lot of big completions, ends up, I believe it was over 300 yards when it was all said and done. And I think if you're Georgia, I think that answered, I don't know that within the Georgia fan base, there were a lot of skeptics, but any that were still out there, and especially nationally. I'm not saying it answers every question. I'm not saying it makes him, one of the top 10 quarterbacks that you would want on your side in a close game, but certainly it showed that he's very capable of leading a team where he's got a lot of talent around him. And the biggest thing was he didn't make any mistakes, is that he took care of the ball and didn't give anything to Tennessee and made some plays along the way. And I think we saw in the season opener when Tennessee played Syracuse that Tennessee defense is not what it was last year.
That's right. Yeah.
But it still is a good team with a lot of talent. Once again, they were at home, and Georgia made enough plays to win the game. And I think when you've got that schedule, like so many of these teams that are highly ranked in the SEC have, you're going to have several games throughout the season that could end up going either way in the final, 5 minutes. And in order to be a playoff team, you're going to have to win a high percentage of those. So just if you're keeping score, Georgia's got 1, Tennessee has none. And, how many can you lose and still survive? We don't know the answer to that question yet.
And by survive, you mean being at large, make the playoff.
Exactly.
One way or the other.
Be into the college football playoff. I mean, you don't necessarily have to win the conference or even get to the conference championship game if you're one of the top teams in the SEC or the Big Ten. But I don't know if you can lose 3. You definitely can't lose 4 if you're not the conference champion. So you're going to need to win the majority of these close games you're in. And Georgia found a way to do it, and they're still sitting there in a good spot with Alabama on deck.
Yeah, no, and that's going to be a fun one too, right? So and we'll talk about Alabama in just a little bit, because I know you paid a lot of attention to them yesterday when they played Wisconsin. But I want to go to Baton Rouge, Florida at LSU. Obviously, Florida's lost to USF the week before kind of put a damper on some things and turned that game into maybe a little less than it could have been going in. And then LSU's defense turned it into a lot less. And I didn't find it to be a classic in the way we saw the other ones. DJ Lagway, who had a lot of hype coming into the season, and I was not quite as high on him as others. Not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying I need to see it, because he's a tremendous athlete. I haven't seen him be a quarterback in a precise sort of way yet, throwing the ball. But he threw 5 interceptions. Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 interceptions. That's like a season for some guys, for elite quarterbacks. He threw 5 interceptions. Some of them were really bad decisions, and some of them were really bad throws, and some of them were both. 5 interceptions. And yet LSU won 20-10, scored 1 offensive touchdown. They scored on one of those interception returns, but they scored 1 offensive touchdown. And so I think LSU has a really nice defense. And yet, despite the fact that we thought that Nussmeier was going to be a really good quarterback, they've really struggled to establish the run and they've really struggled to throw the football. And so I don't really know what to make of LSU. They're better than Florida. I think they win that game if it's in Gainesville too. But because I just think Florida was not as good as people thought, which we could put a pin in that and think about that in a little bit maybe. But I still don't know what to think about LSU other than they're talented, but they can't get out of their way on offense yet. And so that, they're going to have to be better offensively if they're going to beat some of these teams like we just talked about, and others in the SEC.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The good news for them is that, they still have the 0 in the loss column and they have, they have time to make those improvements offensively. And I think they have the talent, to do it.
Yeah.
And it's just
Yeah.
a matter of, can they eventually get it in gear? But, you look at it now and, based on preseason perceptions of Clemson, that
Right.
win was so big, it vaulted LSU like way up near the top of the rankings where they sit today. But now we kind of look at it and you're like, well, is Clemson really that good? And you
Well,
just,
and the answer is no.
yeah. And you just ask the question, is Florida really that good? And it's like, no. So, I mean,
No.
I'm not sure if I believe that Clemson isn't top 25 caliber. So I don't want to go, they haven't looked it right so far this year, but I don't want to take too much away from LSU. But at the same time, I don't think their 3-0 record is what everyone would have imagined it would be as far as making a statement. If we'd had this discussion 3 weeks ago, and I had said, okay,
right.
LSU is going to be 3-0, and you probably would have said, oh, yeah, LSU must be pretty good then. And it's like, well,
not what we thought going into the year about Clemson and Florida. Right.
They're good,
That's right.
but maybe it wasn't quite as impressive as we would have imagined that it would be. Hey, you know what? So much of this is survive in advance. And
That's
Florida's
right.
on the other side of that, which is that they had already laid an egg where they couldn't afford to against USF the week before. Now, I mean, for those who haven't seen Florida's remaining schedule, I mean, the South Florida game was not supposed to be one of those challenges, but LSU was going to be the first in a line of them. They have 7 games remaining. So this is not counting LSU. But with LSU in the rearview mirror, Florida at 1-2, they have 7 games remaining against teams that are currently ranked in the top 15. 5 of those teams are currently ranked in the top 10. In Miami, Texas, Texas A&M, Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Florida State. I mean, you look at, the 2 most winnable games they have left. And remember, they have 1 win right now, Mississippi State in Gainesville and at Kentucky. If they win both of those, okay, that gets them to 3. They're going to have to beat 3 of those 7 remaining top 15 teams on their schedule in order just to get to bowl eligible. I mean, this is, you mentioned off the top about some of the coaching casualties that we've already had. I don't know how much leash Billy Napier has, but this is shaping up to be a really ugly season at a time when he didn't have a whole lot of people singing his praises, coming into the season. He kind of salvaged a little bit of something at the end of last year, but I don't think he built up enough equity to weather the storm that seems to be looming.
No, I think that's right. And I'm glad you went to Billy Napier. Last year they started poorly and then he didn't lose the team, didn't lose his job, but he didn't lose the team and they got better and better. And Lagway started playing better and they did some good things. But it's not like there was a ton of super excitement, I don't think, surrounding. I think there was some cautious hope and they thought Lagway was going to be good and kind of people built that hype train up a little bit more. And I mentioned that earlier than they should have. But Billy Napier doesn't have there's not a whole lot of sort of capital with which to work.
Yeah.
And so I don't think bowl eligibility gets it done for Billy Napier. You're talking about how it feels like it's difficult to get to bowl eligibility at this point. Maybe they're going to rebound and be better than that, right? But they thought this team really kind of needed to be a playoff type team, probably to probably solidify his situation. And I'm not sure that if they somehow found their way to 8-4, I guess that'd be such a turnaround that maybe you give them another year. I don't know, but that's not getting you into the playoff. And that feels like a really long haul. I agree with your assessment of you look at their schedule and it's like, it's going to be hard to get to bowl eligibility. Well, if that's the case, they're going to be getting to bowl eligibility or trying to get to bowl eligibility with an interim coach at some point, probably. Now, I also know that Scott Strickland has already said Billy Napier is our coach for the season, right? I understand that. And it's crazy that he had to say that after week 2 when they lost to USF, but that tells you the situation. But you can say that and you can mean it after week 2. And if things don't go well, and if he, let's say, does seem to lose the team this year, then you'll see that change. That's just how this works, right?
Yeah.
And that sort of takes you to those Dishon Foster gets canned after not very long at UCLA, the alum. They were not good and they were not getting better. And then Brent Pry at Virginia Tech, both of these guys, their programs winless, and Virginia Tech, both of them are proud programs. Virginia Tech gets blown out by Old Dominion. They don't lose to Old Dominion. They get blown out by Old Dominion. And of course, at home, because that's where you play in Old Dominion if you're Virginia Tech. And so the hammer fell, right? And I can't say that anybody's really surprised by either one of those things, other than I continued to be surprised after week 3, right? It used to be when it was 2/3 of the way through the season, we would go, oh my goodness, they fired their coach. It's so early. And then it was halfway through the season. And now we're at week 3 and they're doing that. It's so, if something were to happen with a terrible loss that Florida would take here in the next game or two, they can make the change right then.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, it's possible. Like you said, Scott Strickland said he's the coach for the season. What does that mean? And I do wonder, George, I don't know if you have any thoughts on it. Like, why so early? I understand that these teams need a spark, right? They probably need an infusion of talent is what they need more than anything. I'm not talking about Florida. I'm talking about UCLA and Virginia Tech.
right.
What are you really gaining? Has the landscape changed due to some of the NIL and transfer rules to the point where you need to get so out in front of it that you're able to tell your roster, okay, here's who our coach is going to be, well in advance of that transfer portal, so they're not out there, kicking tires. I don't know. What is the advantage to doing it now as opposed to another month from now? I don't totally get it, but obviously there's some sort of strategy to it, or otherwise, like, why would you make the move?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I don't know that. I don't understand either why you couldn't wait till 6 or 7 games in. Not because but the other point, I guess the point is, if you know it's going to happen, you might as well go ahead and do it, right? I think that's a thing. But so maybe that's what it is, and that's just where we are on this now. I cannot imagine, and of course, I would have said this 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and you would have said the same thing, I think. I cannot imagine that it can really get any earlier, really. In almost every case, it can't get any earlier than after week 3. I mean, maybe there'll be the weird, freaky thing that's, involves an off-field type of deal, right?
Right.
But or all sorts of issues that are extraneous to the actual results on the
Who
field.
who was the Arkansas coach that got canned after game 1, 92?
You're talking about Jack Crow, and they lost to the Citadel.
Yes.
The Citadel, Jack Crow. That's right. So I guess it could happen. And that was 33 years ago. That was
the season opener, right?
I believe that's the case. It might have been week 2, but it was.
I think it was earlier than week 3.
Yep, that's what it was. And so Frank Broyles at the time, the former football coach, very successful there, but had been the athletic director and was for a long time. He made that move just amazingly fast, basically. I mean, it was a little bit like Lane Kiffin getting fired on the tarmac when Lane was at USC. Never even got on the team bus from the airplane. He just got fired right there on the tarmac. Just find your own way home. I had forgotten all about that. Jack Crow.
Yeah.
Later was at Jacksonville State. By all accounts, a pretty good football coach, but you don't lose to the Citadel, right? When you're a Power 5, or at that time Arkansas was in the old Southwest Conference, when you're one of those teams that fancies itself to be a power. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. So I guess it does happen. There is precedent. I'm sure there's more that we're just not thinking about. But all right, so let's talk a little bit more about week 3, because there'll be other coaches to get fired, right? The speculation, by the way, on those 2 coaching searches is going to be out of control, and a lot of the guys that they want to talk with are so far from even really having the representatives have a lot of time to talk with them, that it just, because you're in the middle, you're only a quarter of the way through the season, that it's just like, that's what I don't understand about firing right now. But you got to do it. So, okay. So real quick, Texas won an expected blowout But Arch Manning did not look good at all throwing the football. I mean, he looked bad. Their offense looked bad. Now, their defense is really, really good. And he was being booed on his home field. So we've gone in the span of 3 weeks from Arch Manning being the surefire Heisman winner in many, many people's eyes, and not everybody's, to being booed on his home field by fans. And it was a hearty boo if you've seen any of the highlights. He just doesn't look very good. He looks a long way from being anything close to a whole lot of other quarterbacks in his own league. Put it this way, Marcel Reed looks like he's on another planet.
Yeah.
From Arch Manning. And you might have said that going into the season, but you'd have said it the other way around.
And by the way, there are 2 other former Texas A&M quarterbacks out there, Haynes King and Connor Wegman, who also both look better than Arch Manning right now.
There's no question. Haynes King, by the way, at Georgia Tech how can you not pull for that guy? He can play football. He's a tough kid, and he's playing for a program that is tough, that just beats people. They beat Clemson this on Saturday. So, but Arch Manning, you and I haven't talked on this podcast, but were you buying the hype to any degree going in, or what were your thoughts going into the season about Arch Manning?
Yeah,
Did you get a chance to tell us, put on the truth helmet?
Yeah,
here?
Revisionist history, right? Like, so I felt like the hype was a little too big given the small sample of starts that he had and who they were against. Now, in spot duty, he made a few plays here and there, and I understand. We actually had this conversation when we were doing our wrap up after last season, and we were talking about potential, Heisman favorites and things like that. And, and the question was, if his last name wasn't Manning, based on what he had done on the field, would people have the same reaction? I think we all agreed no. Like this had so much to do with his name. And obviously he was a big time recruit. But I think the other layer to this, and this is something that, has just emerged here in the last few years, is NIL. And you mentioned how he was booed. I think fans and media have long treated college players differently than professional players because they were amateurs.
Not professional. Yeah.
Not professional.
Supposedly. Yeah, right. That's
but
right.
You're right. Supposedly, most of them were. But when it is as well publicized as it is that a player is making 7 figures, then I think it's natural for people to expect some sort of, it's obviously not their investment. They're the fans in the stands. None of them individually put up the 7 figures. Some of them might have contributed to it in bits and pieces, but I still think there's a tendency to look at it though and say, hey, this is not what we paid for. And this is a new dynamic with college sports where you would have fans that would, take frustrations out on a 19 or 20-year-old because he's not living up to what the payroll says that he should be doing as far as the level of play. And I think that's clearly the case with Manning. Would they still be disappointed if he wasn't making any money? Sure, they would be. But I do think it ratchets things up a few notches when that he's not only being paid, but he's being paid an extraordinary amount of money, especially for a college age kid.
Yeah. And, it's not just sort of the money that he's getting in the way they essentially the pay for play that is being called NIL. It's actually sort of traditional NIL, meaning your name, image, and likeness. He's actually being paid that the opener against Ohio State. There were several times you would see Arch's face pop up during the commercial breaks because he's kind of a national ads guy. And that's sort of the power of the name, right? But it's also it's testament to the power of what people thought he might be about to do. And so you got that going on. His profile has been raised. I feel for the kid. I don't blame him for taking the eyeglasses deal, to do the ads and do whatever else. And I don't blame him for taking the money. And he can't help that people think he's going to be great because of his 2 uncles, because of his last name. I feel for the kid, but this is, it's, you build these guys up and then he's not only not that guy, he, to this point, has looked several notches below average,
right.
Not several notches below the crazy standard to which people were saying he might reach or they thought he was going to reach, but several notches below average. And so I feel for him, but you're right. This is the new world we inhabit where people are not going to be treating college players differently than pro players because they're now pro players essentially. So I'm glad you made that point. So all right, you watched Alabama, Wisconsin right here in the remaining time we have in the first half here of the Gridiron and the Gospel. You watched Alabama blow out Wisconsin. I know you watched Alabama in the opener at Tallahassee get beat by Florida State and not look very good doing it. What are your thoughts about after the big blowout win over Wisconsin? We could talk about Luke Fickell and the Badgers and how that's not going well at some other point, but you pay a lot of attention to Alabama as an Alabama graduate, literally wrote a book, maybe not the book, but it's one of the books on Nick Saban. You know that program. What are your thoughts after that victory over Wisconsin? Big blowout win in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at what's changed for Alabama in the last two games, aside from, playing teams that weren't as good as Florida State, defense has looked a lot better. They've tackled better. They have not had, blown assignments. On offense, I think it's simply a matter of protecting the quarterback. And Ty Simpson has looked incredible the last two games. And we knew coming in, he had a very talented core of receivers. He's had time to find guys. He has been just pinpoint accurate. He was 17 for 17 a week ago. And then this weekend, he was, I don't remember how many incompletions he ended up with, but at one point, I think had gotten up to, I think he threw one incompletion and then ended up rolling off like 14 or 15 more completions in a row. So his accuracy has just been off the charts. But like I said, the difference is they've given him time to throw. So I think we understand what he's capable of if the guys around him do their jobs. And I think that's the big question as we move forward, and especially with 2 weeks from now, you have their next game is against Georgia in Athens. And obviously they're going to start playing much better teams in the SEC schedule. Alabama has still struggled to establish the run. I just, at this point, you start to question, will they at any point be a good running team this season? And I think what their success or failure this season is going to come down to is how well they can pass protect. If they can give Simpson time to throw, I think they can beat anybody out there. If they can't, they can lose to most of the teams left on their schedule. I think it's really that simple. Can they protect the quarterback? And I think that's what, what's going to determine whether Alabama is 6-6 or 10-2, because there are just so many games they have left. I read that Florida schedule earlier. Alabama's might not be quite that daunting, but there's still a bunch of games on there that are losable. And, that they're going to have some tests. And I think it really is as simple as, does Ty Simpson have time to do what we've seen him do and what we've seen him show these last 2 weeks?
Well, and as you mentioned, Georgia is looming, which will be a really fun, hopefully, game. That's kind of what we all look forward to, right? Georgia, Alabama. That could be a tremendous contest. Ty Simpson has looked good. I agree with you there. And if you're not able to establish the run to some degree, it's going to be really hard to pass protect. People can then begin to pin their ears back and come after you. So
yeah,
he's going to have to be really good every game. But whether the Tide is kind of self-corrected, the course correction, I don't know. But I know you've been paying attention, so I appreciate that. So, all right, so we could keep talking a lot about week 3, but we're out of time on that. Let's just look at real quick. I'm just going to run through a couple of games, 3 or 4 or 5 games this week, and you never know what's going to turn into a great game or not. But you tell me which game, you would just have to watch. All right. These are not in any particular order, I don't think. Florida at number 4, Miami. Is that even a big game at this point, right?
At
I
Miami,
guess it is.
At Miami, I wouldn't think it should be, or I wouldn't think it should be an ultra competitive game. You never know in state like that, but it doesn't feel like a big game.
All right. Number 22, Auburn at number 11, Oklahoma. And it's going to be, the story all week is going to be Jackson Arnold, who transferred away from Oklahoma after not playing well last year, while they had no receivers, by the way, but he also didn't play very well on his own. He's now the Auburn quarterback, so he comes back to Norman, which obviously has its offense is revamped, retooled, and really, so far, highly explosive under the transfer John Napier, and his offensive coordinator came with him from Washington State. That game there, I think, is the one that a lot of people are going to pay a ton of attention to. And I get why. People to this point, Oklahoma's look really good and Auburn's unbeaten. And Jackson Arnold has played fairly well. Whether he's going to be able to slice and dice people, I don't know. To this point, it still doesn't. He's got healthy receivers and he's still not slicing and dicing people yet. But I'm excited about that game. I'll watch that game because I think it's just full of intrigue. And I saw Auburn in person week 1 on a Friday night come into Waco and watched Arnold, and he was not super impressive except with his feet. And he essentially was the difference in the ball game as they beat Baylor. So I want to see that one. One that's off the radar, number 17, Texas Tech at number 16, Utah. We don't pay a lot of attention to these schools, but Texas Tech is the school that loaded up using the new NIL rules this year. And now Utah is just Utah every year. That game intrigue you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. There are 2 games on the schedule that just looking at the names don't get too many people excited, but I think they should be really fun games to watch. There's that one and then Illinois at Indiana.
Right.
Those 2 are very similar to me for that reason, which is that like if you love college football, this is a game you should tune into because given the format that we have right now, the winner of these games is going to be in a good position to make a run at the playoff. I think people would have laughed at week 4 of last year if you had said that Indiana was in position, and look what happened. I mean, off the top of my head, I don't know the remaining schedules of Indiana and Illinois and who's got a friendly setup and who doesn't. But I know that this is one of the bigger hurdles that either of those teams probably has on their schedule. So it's a big game for that reason. And yeah, I'm looking forward to I think I know what Utah is. I'm looking forward to seeing how improved Texas Tech is.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'd agree with that. And I just want to say one thing before we hit the break. Has any college football podcast ever, or any college football radio show, you and I both radio veterans from back in the day, ever said Illinois versus Indiana is must-watch TV?
No, I'm trying to think if there may have been a moment back in the 80s or, some point like that. But in the last 30 years, I feel pretty confident nobody has ever said. I think what they would have said is that if you are a college football junkie and have absolutely nothing else to do with your life, you should tune in to Illinois, Indiana. That's about the closest anyone would have come to saying what I just said.
Fair enough. All right, we got to take a break and I head to the locker room. When we come back, we come to the second half of Gridiron and the Gospel. We're going to talk about faith, which is our favorite shared subject. We're going to talk about our faith in Christ. So hold on. We'll be right back with more of Gridiron and the Gospel. Welcome back to Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast. This is the second half when we talk about faith in Christ. This is why Brad Edwards and I started this podcast, y'all. We love college football. We both covered college football for a long time. Him for ESPN, me at various newspapers, and then at USA Today covering college football. But we both love Jesus more. He saved us, and we want to bring him glory with our lives by living for him and telling others about him. And the idea that we could utilize college football as a vehicle to talk about faith in Christ is something that Brad brought to me several years ago now and just said, hey, what would that look like? And we just started dreaming about what it could look like. And this is what resulted here. And so that said, we did 2 seasons together, and then you and I talked over the summer. And basically, Brad, you said, hey, man, I feel like I need to step away for this season of my life. And I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but I believe that the way that I would characterize it is you said, I want to choose family over football.
Yeah.
Which may be like a crazy thing for some of our listeners to think about, right? And probably for you and me, in reality, in just the way we've operated through the years, sometimes we haven't always chosen family over football. I would say that's been true of me sometimes. And so I would just love to hear, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't want to say something that you may have other reasons, but tell us what's going on with you these days.
Yeah, I know that you and I both had times that because of our job, we put football over family. Because we were required to be at football games, not only all day Saturday, but often traveling back on Sunday, traveling to the game on Thursday or Friday. So a lot of time was taken up in the fall. Obviously, we're not exactly in those positions now, but being a college football fan can be demanding on a fall Saturday
Yes, it
because if
can. Just
you
being a
love the sport,
fan. Never
yeah,
mind being a journalist when you were, in Eugene you live in Connecticut currently, and you were in
yeah,
Eugene one week, and the next week you were in Austin. And, that was the kind of schedule I kept too. Never mind that. Just being a fan is demanding.
yeah. It's pretty much 12 hours, close to 12 hours of football every Saturday, compelling games, and it's just fun to sit there and watch it. I know you've had some opportunities in the last couple of years that we've discussed on this pod to experience football with your family. Just a few outings, which were great, and love hearing that. I had, as you did, and many listeners did, had the experience when I was a child of being able to share in my father's love for college football and go to games with him. It was family and football went together. Where I am now is I have kids that are pretty much grown. And my youngest is 17. She is soon to turn 18, is a senior in high school. And my kids, all girls, have never really gotten into sports, either playing or watching. And so they don't share my love of college football. They will sometimes sit around and just kind of watch it with me and ask questions, but they don't really have interest in it. And so it's not something that we've ever done as kind of a bonding thing. My wife went to Syracuse, so she doesn't care about football. So I've been on my own watching football when I'm at home, and we're at a point right now where my wife and I made a decision years ago, or I should say, made a decision. We voiced a preference years ago that we wanted to leave New England after all the kids are out of high school. And
Hmm.
and now that that's upon us, and look, I mean, we don't know what God has in store. It's possible that might not happen, but as of now, that's still our plan. And what I told you this summer is that it's starting to really hit home. And when you think about, maybe only having 10 more weekends, to be able to, 10 more months of weekends to spend with your kids.
40 more weekends or
Yeah,
something.
40 more weekends if you
42,
want to look at it.
43,
If you want to look at it that way.
maybe I shouldn't have said that. I'm like creating no one. Yeah, my
Yeah,
fault.
so my thought was like I can't spend all day Saturday watching football like I used to. And maybe you don't have to do that to do this podcast, but I feel like if I'm going to come on here and be educated about all those teams, I need to watch more than one game on a Saturday. And
That's right.
I didn't think, and I still don't think I'm in position to do that on a regular basis this fall because I really do want to spend more time with my kids. Through the first 3 weeks, I've been able to do that, and it's been great. It's just, and it is one of those things I think for so many of us moved away from home and through much of our adult lives did not live close to our parents, and we know what that's like to have that separation. It's not that you'll never
Hmm.
see them again, but it's things will never be exactly as they were. And that's life. Like you grow up, you move on, you have your own life and your own priorities, and eventually hopefully they'll have their own families too. But for the time that I do have remaining with them, I want to take advantage of it and try to make more memories. And that involves, spending time together. And I'm just very happy that I'm able to do that and blessed to, have a wonderful family and a healthy family and just the opportunity to be able to do things together. And, if that time is limited to this next 10 months, I just want to make the most of it. So that's where I am. And George, I'm thrilled that the podcast is still going, that Dean wanted to do it, and that you guys can, still kind of focus on what we had intended to do when we started this a couple years ago.
Yeah. Well, let me say a couple things. One, what you just said is, man, first of all, I'm glad to have you here on this episode. I'm glad you called me 3.5 years ago or whenever, 4 years ago, whenever that was. I can't remember, but I'm glad you called me and said, hey, and we just started talking and it became this podcast. I'm glad we did 2 seasons of it together. I'm glad that you're here, as I said, to do this episode. But I'm really glad, especially after the conversations that we had had before this football season and the podcast season kicked off. And I'm glad that you made this decision. And I'm glad that I'm glad that we have the opportunity for you to say that on the second half of this podcast, this episode. And I hope a lot of people hear it, because I'm not saying you have to step back from your Ole Miss fandom or your Texas A&M fandom or your Alabama fandom or whatever it is and never watch them again because you need to spend time with your kids. But I do think we ought to check ourselves, especially if it's not a family and football thing, which sometimes it's not, right? As you were saying, your daughters, they don't care about football. Your wife doesn't care about football. I mean, how could you? She went to Syracuse, right? I mean, goodness. And I'm kidding, but some of our
They
listeners,
just to clarify, they can pick Nick Saban out of a lineup. They do know that much.
they do. No, but that's because they live with you or they
That's
know
true,
you
yes.
and that you're their dad, right? But that said, some of our listeners need to think about choosing family over football more than occasionally, right? And I'm not going to get into the jokes about fall weddings and stuff like that. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying, we talk sometimes about, are you going to choose faith over football? And that is a big, big deal, right? I mean, and it's an issue. But man, at least secondarily, really, really important. There's nothing more important, especially to the fathers we're talking to. And I realize we don't only have dads, we have many women who listen. I get it. We have people who aren't married, aren't fathers, aren't mothers. But as it relates to that, man, football, as much as we love it, cannot be above God, your family. We could probably throw some other things in there. It can't be more important than those things. And so I'm so glad you made that decision, as much as I hate that you're not on the podcast. And you're right, Dean's doing a great job. But so anyway, so thank you for sharing your heart and thanks for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Happy to be able to do it. And hopefully I'll, join you a time or two more when Dean is here, maybe before the
definitely
season's
want that.
over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know that.
So you just used that word heart, George. And so it's a good setup for me to lead into what I know is coming. And I have not been able to introduce it so far this season for reasons that we just explained. But I know our favorite segment has always been On My Heart. And I know you have something prepared for us to talk about.
Well, I do, and I appreciate that. And first of all, you just gave us an On My Heart segment, right? So we'll go there. But
Yeah.
here's what's on my heart this week. I am, many of you guys know, I'm now a pastor of a church here in Texas. And so we started a week ago a look at Paul's letter to Titus in the New Testament. It's a very short letter. It's three chapters. It's 46 verses. By comparison, I guess before I make a comparison, I should know the exact number, but Psalm 119 has like 160 something verses, right? Just the Psalm 119. This is 46 verses. I mean, you go read it. You can read it in several minutes, and that's all it would take you to read it. But it's a tremendous letter that he wrote to Titus, and he wanted to lay the foundation for healthy churches. And a good emphasis on that was healthy believers, right? And so in the very first verse in his greetings, and when you read something that Paul wrote, and by the way, when you read anything in the Bible, don't just skip over stuff, right? But there'd be a tendency you read Paul's different letters to churches or to Timothy or to Titus or something like that. And you get the point and you're like, okay, this is just his greeting. He's going to get into the meat of things here in a few verses, except the greetings are super meaty. So don't just skip over them. In the first verse, Titus 1, verse 1, he says, Paul, he introduced himself, Paul, a servant of God and an apostle of Jesus Christ. And, look, obviously Titus knows who he is, but he's writing it with the expectation that Titus it's going to be read to the people that Titus is ministering to on the island of Crete in the Mediterranean. So Paul, he says, I'm writing for the faith of God's elect, meaning believers, Christ followers, and their knowledge of the truth that leads to godliness. He's writing for the faith of God's elect and their knowledge of the truth that leads to godliness. Okay, so I want to just focus on that phrase tonight. That's all I want to do, just for 3 or 4 minutes. And here's what he's saying. Paul is saying in that one little phrase, if you have come to the knowledge of the truth, and I don't just mean that sort of the gospel, the good news, that you've heard that God created everything, we've all sinned against him, Jesus paid the penalty for sin, and so you're separated from God, and if you die in your sin, you go to hell. But if you trust Jesus, you're saved. I don't just mean that you've heard the gospel. I pray that you have. I pray that you do what he's talking about. if you've come to a saving knowledge of the truth is what he's talking about. If you have embraced the gospel truth, first of all, you believe it's true. Secondly, you've said yes to Jesus, right? You've embraced the gospel. Paul's saying, if that's you, if you have this saving knowledge of the truth, it leads to godliness. It leads to a godly life. And so the idea is a gospel embrace leads to a godly life. And as I said, he's laying the foundation in this book, in this letter from here on out for healthy churches. He's going to have Titus teach these young believers in these very new churches on this island of Crete how to live for Christ together, and then obviously individually as believers. And there's going to be a huge emphasis on good works. If you go through and you ever read these 46 verses, circle the number of times it says good work or good works. Just circle it. And in most translations, you're going to find a bunch of those. But he doesn't mean that you do that to earn salvation. You work to earn salvation. That's not what he's saying. He says you're doing these good things, these good works because you've been given salvation, because you've come to that saving knowledge of the truth. It leads to godliness, to good works. And so because you've heard the gospel and embraced Jesus, you want to please God. You want to do these good works, right? So what I would like to do is ask this question of our listeners real quick. This is what's on my heart. If you claim Christ, and many of our listeners do, some don't, right? If you claim to be a follower of Jesus, does your life reflect that? And here's what I mean. If you've come to the saving knowledge of the truth, has it led to godliness? And I don't mean perfection. I don't mean that you're as far along the road as the guy next to you or the best Christian you know or whatever. What I mean is, does your life reflect a life of good works that you were trying to do, that you want to please him, to bring him glory, not to earn salvation, but because you're of gratitude? Are you living a godly life? And my question, and then my challenge is this. And if it doesn't reflect that, would you consider what that might actually mean about whether you've actually embraced the gospel, whether you've actually embraced Jesus? Would you consider that? And I would really appreciate it. And listen, I would just say this. I would love to talk with you about that. I know that Brad's not on this podcast all the time, but he'd love to talk with you about that. That's why we started this podcast, is because we want to share about the one who saved us, who brought us from death to life. And we want you to know him too. And so that's what's on my heart, Brad. And it's on my heart for our church, and it's on my heart for our listeners in our podcast. And it's on my heart just in general for people that I come across, that God brings across my path.
Yeah, George, I that's so important what you just said, not just because people can get those confused and think that, okay, good works will save them, but just a knowledge of if you do have faith, it's going to lead to good works. It's going to lead to fruit being produced. And that's an evidence of your salvation. And so I guess this kind of hits home to me because, and look, I know anyone who's around our age is very well aware of this, but I had a good childhood friend who died of a heart attack last week. And or I guess it was about 10 days ago at this point. And, 52 years old. And it's one of those things that it's just a reminder that we're not all going to live to 70, 80. And I think a lot of times we just kind of have some sort of comfort in this idea that, oh, you know what, when I was a kid, I professed my faith. And so therefore, I'm in good shape. And like you said, ask yourself the question, what type of fruit is your life producing? Is there evidence that you do have faith in Jesus, that you're living for Jesus? And if that evidence isn't there, then you might want to think about whether you really are in the position that you think you are. And don't wait until it's too late to ask that question. That's a question that we all need to not just ask now, but I think every now and then we need to kind of do a check of ourselves. Like, okay, how am I in this category? Am I moving in the right direction? Am I where I need to be? And there a lot of us, might have had times that, okay, maybe 15 years ago I was doing pretty well there, but now I've kind of become reclusive, and I'm focusing on other things, and I'm not really doing things that are evidence of my faith. And it's not just a matter of doing one thing. We got to keep going. We got to keep going. We've been given something to do, and and we're supposed to keep doing it for as long as we can.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I appreciate it. And, let's just, y'all keep moving forward, keep following Jesus, keep following Jesus. And look, if you'd like to know more about the faith that Brad and I share, that Dean and Brad and I share, we would love to talk with you about it. You can reach out, email us at gridirongospelpod@gmail.com. You can reach out on Twitter at George Schroeder. Dean's email is at Dean and Sarah. And Brad, I know you won't mind. Yours is at J Brad Edwards. And we would love to schedule a time to talk with you about it and just let you, pick our brains. We don't know a ton, but we know Jesus because he saved us, and we'd love to talk with you. So, Brad, again, thank you for joining today. I'm
My pleasure.
so glad, man. It was so much fun just to kind of, it's like a blast from the past, even though it hadn't been very long. So, and we'll have you on again once or twice this season. And just, but thank you for choosing family over football too. I appreciate that. I'm grateful.
That's
that you've
also
done
my
that.
pleasure.
That's an example. Yes, exactly. That's an example for all of us. So, hey, we're going to wrap up the show for this week. And by the way, we are on YouTube. Some of you guys may be watching our ugly mugs right now. And if so, thank you for persevering. If not, you can find us on our YouTube channel. Just search for Gridiron and the Gospel. And obviously, we're wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Please rate, review, and subscribe. Hit the like button. We'd appreciate that. You can also find us on Twitter or Instagram at gridiron_gospel, at gridiron_gospel. And would love to talk with you guys, as I said. So please reach out. Tune in next week for more Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast.